Okay, let's get right into this explainer. Today, we are unpacking a solemn but absolutely critical topic from Week 7 of the Restoring Hope Ministries ethics course: sexual misconduct, grooming, and the betrayal of sacred trust. Now, I know this isn't a light subject by any means, but as the source material makes incredibly clear, having a structured, unflinching understanding of these dynamics is literally the bedrock of protecting the vulnerable people entrusted to ministry care.
Picture this for a second. A ministry leader initiates these private, deeply emotional conversations with a counselee, totally under the guise of pastoral care. But slowly, the tone starts to shift. It becomes secretive. There's flattery involved. And before long, the counselee begins to feel exclusively dependent on this one leader. What we are dropping right into here are the active mechanics of grooming. It's incredibly subtle, usually cloaked in spiritual language, and it deliberately prepares the ground for profound abuse.
To really navigate this source material, we're going to follow a clear roadmap. We'll break down the anatomy of spiritual grooming, look at the deep betrayal it represents, and learn how to spot the red flags of manipulation. Then we'll get highly practical with an escalation decision tree, and finally, your own protective response plan.
All right, let's start with that first piece: how genuine care gets twisted into exploitation.
Because you see, this shift almost never happens overnight. It is a calculated descent. The sources map out how grooming is a very deliberate process, and it usually starts with boundary-crossing emotional conversations, or maybe even flirtation and sexualized humor. That's step 1. Then it moves to step 2, flattery. The leader makes the individual feel uniquely understood. Step 3 brings in this dangerous web of emotional dependency. And finally, step 4 locks the trap entirely with secrecy. The text heavily emphasizes that this emotionally intimate dependency is exactly what tills the soil for abuse.
Moving forward, we really need to anchor the sheer severity of this betrayal in our foundational texts.
In a ministry context, we aren't just talking about a policy violation, right? It's a massive theological failure. The source text identifies a clear thread running straight through Scripture that explicitly condemns the abuse of power. We're talking everything from David's tragic abuse of power in 2 Samuel 11 to the stark warnings in Proverbs 5, all the way to Jesus' fierce warnings in Matthew 5 and 18 about harming the vulnerable. And it goes right into the epistles with Paul's strict boundaries. The crucial takeaway here is that God views the abuse of power and sexual sin as a profound betrayal. It makes it undeniably clear: exploiting the vulnerable is a severe offense against the image of God. People are image bearers. They can never be treated as objects or problems.
Actually, there's a sobering phrase in the Restoring Hope Ministries textbook that hits the nail on the head. They call this the weaponization of spiritual trust. I mean, wow. Think about that. This isn't just a moral stumbling block, which, let's be honest, is a term people sometimes use to minimize the damage. No, this is the active weaponization of a sacred bond. When a counselor uses their position to exploit vulnerability, they are actively damaging the witness of Christ and deeply scarring another human being.
So, with that biblical foundation laid, how do we spot it? Let's look at the psychological mechanics and the glaring red flags of manipulation.
We absolutely have to know what to look for before the trap closes. To help us spot manipulation in real time, the material draws a super sharp contrast. Healthy biblical care is transparent. It welcomes accountability, involves the broader community, and most importantly, it points the counselee to Christ. Spiritual manipulation, on the other hand, it deliberately isolates the individual. It cuts them off from other support systems and intentionally creates an emotional dependency entirely on the leader.
I really want you to burn 2 words into your memory: secrecy and specialness. The sources highlight these as the ultimate red flags that a pastoral care relationship has become exploitative. Whenever these 2 elements enter the dynamic, exploitation is almost certainly underway. If a leader says something like, you and I have a unique connection that others just don't understand, well, that's specialness. If they say, let's just keep this conversation between us, that is secrecy. Those are the sirens warning you that boundaries have officially collapsed.
And this brings up a concept that completely reframes the entire conversation around abuse in ministry. We must understand the power dynamic. A counselee might appear willing on the surface, sure, but they could simply be seeking approval, spiritual affirmation, or just relief from deep shame. Because of that inherent power differential, that consent is ethically invalid. The leader always, and I mean always, carries the ethical burden to guard the relationship. You can never use biblical language to somehow sanctify access to another person's body or emotions.
Spotting the signs is only half the battle, though. Now we need to talk about organizational safeguards so we can actually intervene. You literally cannot rely on your gut instinct when a crisis hits. You need a system. Enter the Restoring Hope Ministries decision tree. This acts as a precise protocol showing you exactly what questions to ask and what to document before you act. You ask, what happened, but you document only observable facts. Skip the speculative or loaded spiritual labels. You ask, who is at risk and who did I consult? As the source material reminds us, ethical discernment should be slow enough to be wise, but fast enough to protect the vulnerable when danger is present. Documentation is absolutely your best tool here.
Because, let's be honest, preventing abuse takes way more than just telling people to do the right thing. The text mandates strict structural policies, zero tolerance for sexual or romantic relationships with counselees, an absolute prohibition of flirtation and unnecessary physical contact, strict background screening, and extremely clear reporting pathways. And these structures are vital because they protect complainants from being silenced by appeals to institutional reputation or forced forgiveness. A Christ-centered ministry can survive hard truth. It absolutely cannot survive protected deception. These policies guarantee that an allegation against a powerful leader gets an independent review rather than just being handled inside the family.
This leads us right into the final part of our roadmap, your actual protective response plan.
This is where all this theory hits the pavement. Knowing the concepts is great, but applying them is what actually protects people. Your Week 7 assignment requires you to build a concrete protective response plan for a scenario involving suspected grooming by a ministry volunteer. You'll need to map out detailed supervision steps, documentation, and reporting consultation. The ultimate goal here is to produce a portfolio artifact, a complete sexual misconduct prevention and escalation protocol. You are taking the textbook concepts and operationalizing them directly into a ministry's DNA.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a pretty heavy question. If those ultimate red flags of secrecy and specialness flashed in a ministry today, are people equipped to take decisive, protocol-driven protective action? Or would the pressure of power dynamics cause hesitation? The course emphasizes that having these protocols in place ensures no one hesitates when it's time to protect the vulnerable. Thanks for joining me as we unpacked this deeply important source material. I hope it provided a clear, structured understanding of these absolute essential safeguards.